couple of months ago, we were contacted by a friend of ours, another land surveyor. He had a client that needed to fix a boundary survey that had been done on some property in the Central California coast. And this property was it's a little over 1,200 acres. There's a couple sections. If you're a surveyor, you'll know what that is. A couple sections of land. And the land was being sold to the federal government as part of some conservation that was being done. And the broker that was representing the private landowner had gone out and gotten a survey. So the BLM required a survey because this property hadn't been surveyed in 100 years, 150 years. So the BLM said, we're willing to take ownership of this land, and the federal government was willing to pay them for it, but the BLM said, you got to survey it before we'll take possession of it. And that's fairly standard if the BLM is worried there could potentially be encroachments or other problems. And so the broker went out and they hired a civil engineer to do this boundary survey. And if you're in California, this guy's what we call a pre-82 engineer. So he was licensed before 1982. In California, we changed the law in 1982. We don't let civil engineers survey anymore unless they pass the licensed surveyor exam. So this guy was as a general rule, if I'm following survey work by pre-1982 civil engineers, I get nervous because they don't do a good job usually. So this guy was one of those. So he's an older pre-1982 civil engineer, and so he went out and did a survey. And I don't know what they paid for it. I suspect it wasn't very much. So the client goes out, they pay for this survey, hire the civil engineer, broker hires a civil engineer, pay for the survey, and they send it into the BLM. And the BLM rejects the survey. They basically said, "Nice try. This is cute, but it's not. We're not going to accept it. Try again." So we were contacted to see if we could fix this, if we could go out and redo this survey. So part of the problem was, so we start reviewing the documentation provided by the BLM, and we look at the survey that was done. And basically, what this guy did is he went out and did what they called a quote unquote a drone survey, and they didn't get out on the ground and do what they were supposed to do. And so why did they do that? Why did they do a drone survey? I did a drone survey because this is rugged terrain. It's a couple square miles in the California coastal range, and the client told the BLM, the broker told the BLM, it'd be cost prohibitive to do a ground survey. And the BLM said, well, nice try. If you want to do a boundary survey, you have to actually go out on the ground. So the BLM rejects the survey. Why did they do that? Well, I'm going to give you 5 reasons why they rejected the survey, and this is in the letter from the BLM to the broker, and then we can talk about what are the lessons here, okay? So number 1, the BLM said, drone methods are not acceptable for a boundary survey. You actually have to get out on the ground and execute a boundary survey, right? Number 2, they said, hey, you made some misleading statements on your survey about the monuments you found. So the survey that was performed by the civil engineer, he said he found, quote, BLM brass discs, unquote, at the corners. And the BLM said, hey, we went back and checked the records. The BLM has never set brass discs on these section corners and quarter corners. You may have found brass discs, but they weren't BLM brass discs. And we suspect you didn't find brass discs at all. So don't lie to us on your survey, basically is what they said. So that was the second reason. The third reason was the BLM said, hey, you have no description of methods you used on your survey on the face of the survey. So there was no survey narrative, no explanation of how the survey was executed. Number 4, they said, hey, there's major features here on the property that you said were approximately located. They said, we need to have them actually located accurately. I think there was some high voltage overhead power lines and some fences and some other things. BLM said, hey, we need to know where those are at because we want to find out if there's encroachments. And then finally, the 5th reason, the BLM in their letter said, hey, you didn't survey and mark out these lines on the ground. So they said some of these property lines you showed as dashed and approximate on your survey. They said, this isn't a real survey, right? This is a sketch. It's a fairy tale sketch, and you have to actually survey those lines on the ground. So I thought it was a great letter from the BLM, right? Rock on BLM. They weren't going to take a garbage survey from a civil engineer. I thought it was an excellent letter, and it was great feedback. It was specific, and it was pointed. And so I commend the gentleman at the BLM that put that letter together that did a good job. And so anyway, so the client called us. Of course, now they're worried because they're trying to close escrow with the feds, and they said, "What's it going to cost to fix this?" And I don't remember the exact number, but we looked at it. We said, "Yeah, it's $40,000 to $50,000 to get out and do what the BLM's asking to do." And they said, "Oh my God!" They said, "That's way more than we paid the first guy." And I said, "Yeah, I know. It's probably way more than you paid the first guy because the first guy didn't do a real survey, right?" So the broker that hired this civil engineer, got what he paid for, right? And if this had been a transaction between two private parties, he might have got away with that. The broker might have got away with that. But in this case, there was a well-informed land surveyor on the buyer's side of the transaction, and he knew, and that surveyor knew better, right? So he said, "Hey, $40,000 to $50,000 to get this fixed." So the client said, "Okay, well, the BLM has a contract surveyor that will survey it, and they said they'd do it for about half that." And I said, "No problem." I said, I'm not gonna get in a bidding war with the contract surveyor for the BLM. I said, "When can they get to it?" They said, "Well, they told us 6 to 12 months." I said, "Okay, I can do it next week. If you want to wait 6 to 12 months for the BLM surveyor, you certainly can." So we never heard back from them, and I don't know if the deal fell through or if they went ahead and went with the contract BLM surveyor to get their survey done. But what do we learn from this? If you're a seller or a buyer, or you're a commercial real estate broker, what are the lessons here? I think the main lesson is you get what you pay for. And if you don't hire a quality boundary surveyor, you are probably going to waste your client's time and your money, and you could jeopardize the deal, right? And if you've got one surveyor telling you that something's going to cost $40,000, and you got another surveyor telling you it's going to cost $2,500, you have a problem. And you need to ask some more questions there, right? Because those two estimates aren't even in the ballpark. And there's a good chance if you hire the low bid guy, you're going to have a survey that isn't worth the paper it's printed on, right? And I tell people all the time, I don't compete for boundary surveys on low bid because there's always a way to cut corners. And this is a good example of that, right? There's always a way to cut corners and lower price on a boundary survey. And we don't do this kind of work. So don't waste your client's time and don't waste their money. If you need a survey, hire a quality boundary surveyor. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're getting a nasty letter from the BLM or from a lender or from a title company, because you have a fairy tale survey. Get a real survey, pay to get the job done right. That's the smart move. And you don't want to end up in this situation. Here's the worst part of the situation. Not only did the broker waste his client's money and delay the transaction now because they had to go out and get another survey, but at this point, the surveyor at the BLM now he's puckered up, rightfully so, right? And he's gonna put this next survey under a tremendous amount of scrutiny because this broker already tried to take a shortcut once, right? And so there's a bad taste in the mouth of the buyer, right? And that's not what you want. So there you go. Don't waste money on a boundary survey that's going to get rejected.